In my video discussing Randall's descent into a villain, I briefly brought up the point that he and Sully weren't too different from each other at the start of their films. In the prequel, Monsters University, they both take their first steps into the scaring industry as hopeful young adults dealing with fears of social rejection. In Monsters, Inc., the two have reached the pinnacle of their careers and are both well-respected figures in society thanks to that success. However, neither of them have any sympathy for the children they terrorize on a regular basis. But wait, you might be thinking, Sully cared about Boo, right? He's the good guy. How could I even compare him to Randall? Well, yes, from the beginning we are introduced to Sully as a good guy. He's a good neighbor, cheerful to everyone in his community. He's a good friend, supporting Mike in his relationship with Celia and calling Randall down when he mocks him. He's a good co-worker, always acting with a humble attitude despite his status as the company's best scarer. None of these things, however, mean anything to the children he scares. For them, he is their worst nightmare. As a result, Sully and Randall both reflect a wider issue about their world. To monsters, humans are not considered people. One thing you might catch on to is that, when she first enters the film, Boo is not called a she, but an it, by largely everyone except for Sully. She and other kids like her are either simply an energy source, or dangerous, toxic creatures that monsters themselves need to fear. We do gradually see Sully and Mike get attached to Boo, but for a while, it's more like how someone gets attached to a dog. Mike even sarcastically calls her a pet at one point, and then later tries to get her to run back into the human world by throwing a pencil like a stick. Even we, the audience, are not an exception to this distance. Because Boo is a young toddler who has difficulty directly communicating with anyone, babbling most of the time, we can find it hard to get close to her compared to the monsters. We don't get much of anything regarding her background, and for us just going into the movie, Boo may as well have been just the same as any Looney Tunes baby that exists to cause havoc. That doesn't even begin to cover how deeply rooted the fear of a human child's toxicity is in the monster world. We see the monsters go into mass hysteria from a child breach. When there's a 2319, the code used to refer to when a scarer comes into contact with something that a human kid has touched, the CDA, or Child Detection Agency, bursts onto the scene to do a full decontamination, up to destroying the supposedly toxic object. And if you've read the film's novelization by Kiki Thorpe, it gets even worse. In one scene that was changed at apparently the last minute, the sushi restaurant Harryhausen's was supposed to be blown up by the CDA, rather than just have some sci-fi dome cast over it. This is actually kept in the novel, and when Fungus later tells Randall about this, he uses the phrase, "the child may have survived rather than escaped," which kind of implies that the CDA was hoping that the child wouldn't survive. So boys and girls, if you ever think of going through your closet to sneak into the monster world, just be sure to know that the monsters are packing heat. Even after the events of the film, this fear of humans doesn't really go away. Across almost all post-film media, Mike and Sully are forced to hide their continued relationship with Boo. In the comic series Monsters, Inc. Laugh Factory, we see side characters like Miss Nesbit show a great deal of anxiety at the possibility of yet another child breach. She even refers to this as an infestation. My point with explaining all of this is to ask a genuine question. If this is how monsters as a whole see humans, then aside from the possible risk to their own safety, why would they bother to care about kidnapping kids for the Scream Extractor? To most of them, Randall and Waternoose wouldn't be seen as villains, but as industrial pioneers that proved human kids weren't as dangerous as everyone initially thought, who then came up with an effective solution for the energy crisis. If Sully hadn't stumbled upon Boo's door, this might have been a very different story. All that said, let's actually get back to Sully. Again, at best, he feels nothing but apathy toward Boo and other human children in the beginning. One of the first clues we see that he might start to break from this mindset is when he gets Boo to go to sleep. And there's still a lot of negative things to unpack from the scene. He lays out sheets of newspaper to try to get her to sleep on the floor before reluctantly letting her curl up in his bed. He groans with annoyance at having to explain to her that Randall can't get to her, and laughs off the point that the only reason he won't terrorize her is because he's off duty. It's just business to him. He's in and out of countless stores every day, he doesn't care about the kids that are regular faces to him, and he's certainly not going to care about some random kid another scarer deals with. At least, he shouldn't care. So, where does the change happen? What makes Sully care? Boo is the one to shatter the wall between them first. She takes an instant liking to Sully, ruining his attempts to get away from her. What few times he upsets her, she quickly forgets about. Boo is a naturally lovable, happy child, with neither a fear nor hatred for anyone except Randall. Anyone except her monster, the one Monsters, Inc. tailor-picked to torment her. Sully is a good person at heart, but I don't think this same connection and eventual character growth would have been possible if one of the kids he was already paired with had crossed into the monster world. That kid would be too scared to ever try to connect with Sully the way that Boo did. On Sully's part, their relationship develops due to the general compassion and thoughtfulness that he already extends to those around him. He understands the need to be conscious of others and the part he has to play in society, be it as a role model from the fame he's achieved or simply as a decent member of his community. Despite the danger that Boo's presence supposedly brings to him in his career, one of his first concerns is how the child breach is going to affect the company. And in the scene where he brings this up, we see more subtle signs of his conscious nature. Let's compare how Sully and Mike act in the scene. Once they've gotten Boo content and distracted enough to stay out of their way, we find Mike positioned with his back to her, focused on a bunch of papers with scribbled plans on how to best get rid of her. As much as Mike continues to rant about how dangerous she is, he doesn't have to show as much concern for his own safety because Sully is standing guard. Sully is positioned right in between him and Boo, with his eyes almost constantly pinned on her. While Sully is equally as panicked, he takes the time to observe the girl carefully, allowing him to pick up on the fact that she's getting tired. He doesn't see her truly as a person at this point, but he is willing to set aside his fears in order to understand her wants and needs. We're generally less likely to think rationally or show a genuine concern for those around us when we're wrapped up in our own emotions and desires. We see this in cases where people will literally trample over others, be it out of panic or to grab a hot item that just went on sale. Or in day-to-day scenarios, like when individuals get so stressed that they can lash out at innocent people. It's important to know when to take a deep breath and analyze each situation for what it really is, be it for your own sake or the sake of others. Sully's ability to do just that is what allows him to keep a cooler head than Mike, except Boo, and come up with a reasonable plan to get her home. The change between them is gradual. Little by little, rather than seeing Boo as a human kid, he starts to see her as just a kid, a child dragged into this terrifying situation with far less of an ability to do anything about it than he has. He works even harder to understand her. He begins to play with her, and he allows himself to get attached. And then he ends up terrifying her. When Water News pushes him to show off his talent to an audience of hopeful scarers at the company's scare simulator, he rolls his eyes and jumps right back into his usual routine. He lets out a big loud roar, not knowing that Boo has snuck over to his side, and scares her so badly that she runs off in tears. While this might be a belated point only addressed in Monsters University, Dean Hardscrabble makes a distinction between when a monster makes a child scream and when they make one cry. There's actually a bit of real science behind this as well. While both are signs of distress and are social signals to alert others that an individual might need help, one is a more intense reaction than the other. A scream is a way of releasing adrenaline, which can come from a wide range of emotions. We might let out a scream of fear, but we can also scream at people when we're angry or when we're having fun, like at sporting events or riding amusement park attractions. Meanwhile, when we cry, we're often feeling powerful, overwhelming emotions. Of course, this can come from intense happiness, like at weddings or when seeing extremely beautiful pieces of art, but it's far more likely to come from negative feelings like grief or stress. Crying is like turning a release valve, a way for our bodies to balance themselves out from whatever kind of emotional overload we're experiencing. Boo didn't only scream, she cried, meaning that Sully didn't just scare Boo, he hurt Boo. He's someone that she loves and trusts, and for what must have seemed to be absolutely no reason to this little girl, he roared in her face. For a short time, he became a villain in her eyes. In the background, you can hear Waternoose give Sully the same praise he's used to hearing, but he doesn't pay a bit of attention to it. Instead, as he's trying to calm Boo down, Sully looks up at the cameras giving him a full play-by-play of what happened, and he soon realizes that he's in the wrong. He's been the bad guy for a lot longer than just that one moment, and he has no excuse for what he's done to Boo, because it's what he's done to every unnamed kid he's tormented over the course of his career. In this way, Monsters, Inc. is a story of redemption for Sully. He goes from being the company's top scarer to flipping the entire industry on its head by fueling the world through laughter instead of fear. I gave a lot of credit for Boo for his redemption, but again, it also wouldn't have happened if Sully wasn't a compassionate person to begin with. Our main villain of the film, meanwhile, is the furthest thing from that. Randall never shows compassion or a conscious attitude toward anyone. Not to his co-workers, not to his old friends, and not to the kids he's assigned to. He's long closed off his heart, treating anyone who attempts to form a real connection with him as a nuisance at best. His interactions with his assistant, Fungus, serve as the biggest example of this. Randall treats Fungus mostly as a lackey, regularly threatens and abuses him, and barely takes what he has to say into account. For instance, when we see them working together on the scare floor, at one point, Fungus notes that Randall's numbers are still behind Sully's. And while I personally do understand how annoying that kind of comment can be at times, we need to address that Fungus didn't mean this in any kind of negative way. He wasn't mocking Randall or criticizing his abilities. Before Randall interrupted, he was actually trying to explain that his lower numbers might have been due to a technical issue, specifically with the scream intake valve. If it was just that, then it means that Randall effectively shot himself in the foot by screaming at Fungus to just get him another door instead of pausing to listen. He both gets in his own way and hurts the people who genuinely try to support him by lashing out. If Randall can't act with the least bit of consideration to Fungus, someone who is by his side every day trying to help him reach his goals, then we can't expect him to regard Boo with any consideration either, when terrorizing her is literally his job. More to the point, Randall has grown up to be such an insecure man from where we saw him in Monsters University that all he wants to hear is a stream of constant praise, even when that praise is superficial, like when some of his other co-workers rush to congratulate him and then immediately rush to Sully instead when Randall drops from the top of the scareboard seconds later, pushing him away. His motivations are incredibly pathetic when you think about it. At least Waternoose has the excuse of trying to solve the energy crisis and protecting both Monsters, Inc. and his family legacy. The only thing Randall is trying to protect is his own fragile ego. He can't settle for being one of the best scarers in the business. He has to be the best, or at least better than Sully. And to him, it doesn't matter if he's already talented if he's not getting attention for it. As kind of a side note, one thing that's also worth talking about is that he doesn't cheat in the way Mike assumes he does. In fact, it seems like Randall's a little offended of being accused of it. Because of this, we can't say for sure how satisfied Randall would actually be if his plan had worked. On one hand, the credit for the machine would have given him an insane amount of clout, but not the kind that he's been chasing for his entire career. Instead, he'd be throwing away that career and the careers of all other scarers, possibly without his one-sided rivalry with Sully ever truly being resolved. After all, no scarers means there's no need to keep a scare record. On the other hand, that seems to be his intention. He does call the record stupid. In that case, though, basically he's like a child who keeps losing at board games, so he just knocks all of the pieces onto the floor. Randall no longer cares about his job or even if his actions might be self-sabotaging in the long run. All that matters to him is fame and knowing that he, in some way, took down Sully. Focusing solely on his own ego has left Randall lonely and unfulfilled. He's not just a bitter person, he's an empty one, and it is his own fault that he's like that. In contrast, Sully is shown not to care about his spot in first place. Sure, he has fun challenging Randall on the scare floor, but he also offers Randall a hand and tells him, "May the best monster win." He's not being cheeky, you can tell in his voice that he means it and he doesn't want to let this bitterness between them continue. They were both talented scarers and what the monster world needed due to the scream shortage. At the end of the film, Sully also removed the need for scares just like Randall's plan would have, but he didn't do it to stay in the limelight. He abandoned his and Mike's one dream of breaking the all-time scare record, placing the wellness of others over his own ego. He later steps into an administrative position to keep Monsters, Inc. from falling apart after the CEO's arrest, effectively retiring from the scare floor, or rather now laugh floor, entirely. Randall and Waternoose were right about one thing: scaring wasn't enough anymore, but Sully had the better plan that benefited everyone, human or monster. He opened a door and accidentally let in a little kid that changed his life. And that allowed him to open many more doors for many more people working to build a better tomorrow.